What I want to do today is to start with the chapter I gave you on marriage, same-sex, and opposite sex. And Veronica, I think, was going to give a presentation which could, I don't know whether I asked for that, cover that as well as the reading In the Pursuit of Love.
I'm mainly focused on The Pursuit of Love.
That would be all right.
I could talk a little bit about the marriage one. I mean, I've read it, but I don't really have...
Well then, should we wait for your presentation until people have had a chance to air their opinions about the marriage chapter?
Sure.
I'm waiting. How many, Veronica, could you take a head count, not counting Stuvras? Yeah, I got that right. Stuvras, who's just arrived, but on the people, the other people, how many have read that, and how many have read it?
Okay, how many have read it?
100%.
Well, yes, everyone.
Everyone, then I'm sure you must have some ideas about it. Should I give you a little introduction to get you started? It's a subject that has been taboo in various respects. First, even to talk about homosexuality when I was your age was something nobody ever did. And when I was your age, I had, I'm pretty sure, no ideas what that could be or who might indulge in such behavior. People didn't talk about it, and the assumption was if you were a normal person, which we all think we are, that we would grow up in a very different way. The boys one way, aggressive, manly, and virile, chasing the girls, and the girls in their own way, delicate, gentle, not terribly academic or intellectual, and delighted to have the boys chasing them. All sorts of variations on that, like in the saying that a man chases a woman until she catches him. So that there was a kind of compliance in this stereotypical kind of relationship in which the males were out to capture the women and the women out to escape, to run off, but the women also wanting to be caught so that there could be some harmonious relationship. That was sex as we knew it in my day, which is a long time ago, but nevertheless was characteristic of much of the Western world, except that there was this subculture that nobody knew very much about. About 100 years ago, people began discussing and writing about that, but it was always as a kind of subculture on the fringes. One good example of this situation is the writings of Marcel Proust. Have any of you read his work? But by now you've all heard the name at least. P-R-O-U-S-T?
Hands down, please.
Marcel Proust, a French author who died in 1923, and in my opinion, and in the opinion of many people, he was the greatest philosophical literary figure that ever existed. He was a novelist and also a critic and short story writer, but primarily famous for a work of his that came out in 13 volumes called À la recherche du temps perdu, which is differently translated. Literally, it means in research for lost time, but it became famous in the translation of Scott Moncrief, which is very different, and we don't have to go into that. But the point is that Proust was homosexual, never married. He condemns homosexuality in the novel. He is one of the great figures in homosexual literature. He talks about it and talks about different kinds of relationships, but always in a way that is pejorative. And in one volume in the À la Recherche du Temps Perdu, called the cities of the plain, or Sodom and Gomorrah, he has an essay about the evil of homosexuality. And so one wonders what's going on with him. But it was not uncharacteristic that people who were homosexual felt guilty, felt that they were doing something wrong, felt that they were evil, and then they coped with it in all sorts of different ways. Two examples of homosexuals that the names of whom you, I'm sure, know. One is Leonardo da Vinci, famous at MIT because he was a great inventor as well as a great artist and sculptor. And the other was Michelangelo. Da Vinci was a person who was very even-tempered, and he never showed signs of feeling guilty or miserable because of his sexual inclinations, which were not uncommon in the Renaissance. Michelangelo, who was devoutly Christian, grew up, lived into his 90s as a guilt-racked person who was very forceful, angry, the famous cliche about Michelangelo, who was so aggressive. Well, part of it was this fervor of guilt feeling that was operating in him. They were both homosexuals, both at the same time, very different kinds of temperaments and very different attitudes toward their own sexual behavior. In the case of Leonardo da Vinci, he drew magnificent paintings of women. The Mona Lisa is the most famous. He seemed to understand the soul of women and could capture their beauty in various ways, particularly the Virgin Mary in various religious paintings. In the case of Michelangelo, he also understood women and wrote poetry, particularly toward the end of his life, and it's love poetry of the sort that people were writing men about women. He had a very close relationship with a famous woman, and it's not clear how well he knew her, but people speak of his affair with her. Undoubtedly, it was not a physical affair. It was a very intimate kind of relationship that doesn't necessarily have to involve sex, and they were both getting on in years. So that through all of these complications, and the case of Proust, what's interesting is that he should be explicitly attacking homosexuality while also being homosexual himself. Well, this is a pattern to be studied, but overtly, or in ordinary society, at least the kind of lower class society that I grew up in, no one knew anything about that. When I was in the Army, at one point, I was assigned a room in a hotel in which my unit was being billeted in France, and it was a deluxe hotel. It had only one bed in it, but two soldiers, so we slept in the same bed. The idea that this might somehow be a danger to me, who didn't know what homosexuality was probably, or at least had no such inclinations, and wasn't even experienced in heterosexuality, that the idea of sleeping with another man didn't mean anything. It was something people did. Especially poor people throughout the world have slept together in beds with people of the same sex without anything sexual occurring between them. So that what's especially interesting, and that's how I begin, is how revolutionary the present generation is, the generation that you've grown into, who talk about these things on television and in various other ways, and in which there has been a sexual revolution in the 60s and 70s which liberated people to express their attitudes more freely than they ever could have previously. And one of these forms of liberation occurred in a greater awareness about homosexuality. It's more complicated in one important respect that I didn't want to go into, and that is the work of Sigmund Freud. Freud's idea was that everybody is bisexual. And if that's true, and so much of Freud has entered into the present-day culture because things that he said people seem to believe in, well then why wouldn't it be normal for everybody to have the possibility of, or the potential of being homosexual? In a book of mine that I published 3 years ago called Feeling and Imagination, I think it's there, one of my books, no, I think it is Feeling and Imagination, I attack the concept of bisexuality or latent homosexuality, which is related to it, these two concepts coming out of Freud. It seems to me to be a cliche nowadays that everyone is bisexual, even if one doesn't act on that. It's a dogma of Freud's that I contest, that there's no reason to think that everyone is. And if a great novelist, not Proust so much because he was known to be homosexual, but Thomas Mann, for instance, who wrote about fascination between men, and in Death in Venice about a kind of obsession that an older man has for a younger one, he is interpreted as having spoken as a homosexual, and I contest that charge. So the whole question of what homosexuality is, how it enters into literature, and how it has to be thought about in various contexts is suddenly very much alive, and especially so in the legal area that I address in the essay about same-sex marriage. I gather there seems to be no lessening of the intensity of argumentation in this country. Since the book is coming out next month, you can be sure it was written, the chapter was written a few months ago. I hadn't foreseen how long the agitation would go on, and it seems to be going on and will go on for quite a while. Now, you've read about this, and therefore I would like to know what you think about it, about this question about love between a man and a man in relation to marital love or marital attachment, and love between a woman and a woman in relation to marital attachments. In other words, the whole question about same-sex marriage, which I put at the beginning of the course because it's what at MIT people used to like to call the cutting edge. It's the cutting edge of philosophy of love. It's the most recent current thing that people are talking about and thinking about, and that philosophers ought to engage in. But very few philosophers, as I was telling you last time, nowadays, do engage in this kind of question, and that's why I felt that I should. All right, now, does that help? Remember my image of Saint Sebastian standing at the pillar. Shoot your arrows at me. I've given you a good opportunity because it's such a controversial question, and the majority of people in the United States would certainly not agree with me. So what do you think? What do you think about the issue, and what do you think about what I've asked you to read?
Well, I think that one of the most important points that I think you bring up is the fact that this is more of an issue because of the social aspects of what comes with marriage. And I think that that is one of the main fights for the same-sex marriage between homosexuals.
Social aspects of which side?
I think you mentioned things like being socially accepted as a couple and getting the benefits of being a couple. Because I think it's very hard for someone to argue and say that these two people don't love each other. You can't argue against someone's love. So I think it's more of a whether or not they have the right to exist as a couple in marriage. And I find it hard to say that you can deny people most of the benefits that come with marriage, such as being able to adopt or do things like that, because I think especially in the society we live in right now, there's already, the idea of marriage is already so broken and faltering that if there are two people that have love between each other, then how could you deny them that type of experience?
Let me sum up. Two principles, one legitimization and the other benefits that come with being legitimized as legally married. You mentioned benefits of sort of personal one, the ability to adopt children, but then there are also material benefits, money, right? Okay, so that's the crux of the problem, right? And the children come into it in interesting ways. There's one woman I know who has been living in a lesbian relationship with another woman, and she has 2 children. I don't know where she got the children, whether she adopted them or was previously married and divorced, but she has 2 children. When she was asked in my presence, I didn't ask because I try not to pry, but someone else did, why is it that you care about marriage, getting married to your friend? And she said, because of the boys who were small, I don't know exact ages, but they're fairly small. Because of the boys, my son so-and-so says that the kids kid him about it, that his mother is not even married, and he's afraid that they're going to beat him up. Kids, you know, can be very vicious. They can be, they're on the look for some vulnerable comrade of theirs that they can all gang up on, right? You all know how dangerous little children can be with each other. And so he's afraid that if she remains unmarried, maybe in this context of living with another woman, that he will be hurt. Now, the reasoning on his part would be if she gets legally married, then somehow they're going to leave him alone because their parents are legally married. I'm not convinced that that reasoning works. But the question of adoption and of legitimacy in relationship to the whole family, the children, is certainly a part of it. Anyhow, that was the reason that the mother of the 2 children said she wanted to be legally married, and then she did get legally married. She said that she herself doesn't care very much one way or the other, that she and her friend have made out wills that protect each other against financial hazards, so that apparently they're sufficiently dedicated to each other that she didn't feel any need to have the certificate of marriage, and wanted it only for the sake of the kids. Well, for whatever reason, the question is whether women in her situation, or men in a comparable one, should or should not be denied the opportunity to get married legally. Did I say anything in that you didn't already know and feel?
In this?
In that, yes.
Not really. You just kind of brought to the surface, I guess, what most people already thought. Mm-hmm. But I thought the problem lied mostly in what people believe marriage is, like you said. Like whether or not marriage is something that's more of a religious context, where it's a man and a woman getting together to make the starting of a family, or if it's more of a legal aspect that has the monetary and other legal issues with it. And I guess where people differ there probably has a lot to do with their religion. Since if they're religious, they'll probably fall more on the religious side, and if they're more liberal, then they'll probably fall on the legal side if they oppose it, or if they're for it, either way. But,
can you talk to each other in this, if there's anything you don't agree with? Alderana?
Yeah, I think that the main problem is how society looks at this new issue of same-sex marriage, because in other societies, I know that in some Nordic countries, it's perfectly normal.
But not legal except in the Netherlands. In the Netherlands is the only country that has exactly identical legal status for marriage between men and marriage between, or women, and marriage between a man and a woman. The others are more complicated. France and Belgium approximate that. I don't know about Sweden. You would have Sweden and Norway. Well, maybe Norway may be different, but Sweden is generally a leader in terms of sex reform. But I don't think they're even equivalent.
A politician was married to another one, I think, in Sweden. Was it last year?
I don't know, but
In Sweden, 2 women, you mean? Oh, there was.
I'm pretty sure it was in Sweden or Norway. I don't remember. Yeah.
Were they married, or they just lived together, or had a civil union?
They were married, I remember. So it was headline news in Greece.
That was some years ago.
Yeah, 2 years ago.
Then why is it in all the things I read, it's only the Netherlands that is cited as being completely egalitarian in this respect?
Well, they probably got married, they still have the same rights.
Yeah, they may not have the same rights.
Same rights. Oh, well, that's crucial. Then they're not fully married. No, maybe that's what I should have said. It's only in Netherlands at the moment that people of the same sex can be married in the same sense of rights, the fullness of rights, as the heterosexuals. That might be.
But in my opinion, the way society accepts this is very important for facilitating the legalization of same-sex marriage. For example, if here there wasn't so much opposition, probably it would be easier to legalize it. And in the example you just gave, that the kid is scared because they are going to beat him up. In those countries, it's totally normal. And
well, I don't know, you can tell me better about a country like Mexico, for instance, but when I lived in Italy, the church was still fairly strong, more so than now, and that meant that people didn't get divorced. But they separated, and the men and the women hooked up to other people of the opposite sex. So it was sort of routine. Everybody knew that you'd be married to, the man would be married to one woman, but live in a marital relationship with another woman. And that was the way things were. I don't know about homosexuality, how openly that was understood. But it isn't just a question of how people behave. It's what you call the social acceptance that's important, because that's how the material goods are distributed. That gives a kind of structure to the morality and to the society that's different from the alternative, which would be to fully legalize relationships regardless of gender. Incident, tell me what the situation is in Mexico.
in Mexico, I don't think that it's even close to being legalized, because it's a very macho society. So homosexual people aren't as open about their sexual inclination as they are in America, for example.
A lot of homosexuals are very macho. They're macho with women who like that kind of thing, even though the man might be really not heterosexual, but he can perform and he can dominate a woman. The pimps of prostitutes generally have other interests, but they know how to get the love and dependence of the women who support them. and they can be macho in relationship to each other. So it's more than just macho, unless by macho you mean a way a man treats a woman that he's in love with, you know, like in the tango.
I also mean the fact that it's not considered very manly if a man feels attracted to another man.
You mean if he's effeminate?
Either that or a homosexual.
But all of these concepts have to be analyzed more minutely. I don't even go into it here. Being homosexual means that there is a sexual attachment or urge or interest in another person of the same sex. But the nature of that attachment can be almost as variable as in heterosexual arrangements. Some of the men might be effeminate, some might be very virile, very macho. Among the effeminate ones, there are those who feel submissive in ways that women used to be, and maybe often still are, towards men who are going to protect them. And some of them sort of mimic traits that we associate with women, though nowadays we realize how not all women have those traits. In other words, shaking their hips and lisping, and you know, the word effeminate, the way it's ordinarily used, refers to only this one subclass of men, right? An effeminate man doesn't yet tell you whether he's homosexual or heterosexual. It's something about his attitude, his way of presenting himself to the world. One further complication is that in many art forms, having the kind of grace and suavity and intuitive power that women have is part of the male role. So that if you go to the ballet and you see a very graceful man, you might say, oh, it's because he's homosexual. But it might not be because he's homosexual, it might be because he's graceful. He may have interpreted that himself as meaning he must be homosexual, and it might be in our society that it's only once you find some haven among people who are homosexual that you can't get away with being graceful in the dominant heterosexual society we live in. I've always, long before this became controversial, felt the unfairness of this, because I try and do, I think, see the world aesthetically. And if somebody is extremely graceful in a work of art, a ballet, I don't care what he is, and I don't want to make any inferences about what he is any more than I would about a woman who's very graceful. You know, I don't want to say, no, she's not representative of all the other women who are tough, who are determined, who are going out to beat the males. There's a great variety in self-presentations among women and among men. And a man who is very graceful, if he's a good artist, he's wonderful. The sex doesn't matter. It has nothing to do with it. And yet, unfairly, it has always come into it. Now, part of the excitement of this intellectual issue that we're talking about is that all of this has erupted, so that if people can say, I am X, or the person says I'm homosexual, and I want to get married to another homosexual, well, that's taking this complication as far as it can go. Because without that, somebody might say, I'm not interested in being married, but I want to be graceful. And it doesn't follow I'm homosexual, or I'm homosexual and I'm graceful. All of this is now more overt than it ever has before. There are movies like Victor, Victoria, you probably know, and what's the one, the musical comedy? Well, it was also, before it became musical comedy, was a mover, The Birdcage, or and then there was a sequel, whatever it's called, Birds of Paradise, I'm not sure. in which the whole question, the lifestyle of overt homosexuals is treated very clearly. And it's comically at times, because people can be comical, but that's what they are. And there's even that song in the musical, "I Am What I Am," which is a kind of manifesto of acceptance of oneself. Now, one of the variations or derivations or complications in my philosophy of love is that love consists in acceptance of the other person as that person is. I'll talk about that later because it is one of the consequences of some of my earlier ideas that I may have talked about. Bestowal and appraisal, did I talk about last time? Well, I'll be talking about all of them. Now, if that's true, then somebody who accepts himself has self-love, and why isn't that a good thing? If that's what you are, and you can accept yourself for what you are, what's wrong with that? It's a kind of self-love that is very admirable and very few people can get away with. It's not being selfish, it's simply accepting yourself as you are. And we all have a great deal of trouble about that, because when we're young we don't identify with our origins, and sometimes it's unwise, but eventually we work it out. I'm sorry, go on.
I have a question, because in the beginning, like in the middle I guess, you were talking about like how it's been like pretty much proven in our society right now how separate but equal doesn't really work. Like through the civil or like
that's separate but equal.
The separate but equal, like marriage versus the
does or does not?
Does not.
That was the ruling of the Massachusetts Supreme Court.
Right.
It wasn't my view, because on the contrary, what I was saying was...
Right, then you went on to say that marriage is just like the societal like view. And
in context, does anybody want to clarify this? Maybe I didn't do it well enough. What I was trying to say was, let's say that the situation is finally resolved in there being two kinds of marriage, or two orders of quasi-marital relationship.
Civil union and the...
Civil union, that's right. That was the context. Civil union and marriage. And then some gay liberationists might say, oh, but that's separate but equal, and we know that doesn't work in terms of ethnic origin, in terms of religion, in terms of the color of people's skin. And fortunately, though this too took a long period of development, but fortunately, that is widely recognized by the laws, though maybe not in every situation. So there's still a lot of discrimination. But, you know, there's been a very radical change about that. All right, so if separate but equal doesn't work in education, for instance, the gay liberationists would say neither would it work in terms of marriage. And my idea was, why wouldn't it work? Let's say that people who are heterosexual can get married, because that's what the majority want, and that those who are not heterosexual have a civil union which is identical in terms of rights and privileges and responsibilities with marriage. It simply gets to be a verbal issue. Well, I don't consider verbal issues worth fighting over, if that's all it is. It would be a way of enabling the bigoted heterosexuals to save face, because, or particularly those who are religious, like in the state, one of the, was it a southern state or a middle, was it Missouri? I can't remember. Or just
recently?
Which state was that?
I thought it was Missouri.
Which? Louisiana?
I thought it was Missouri. She thinks, I don't know.
What, where?
I thought it was Louisiana. She thinks it's Missouri. So
No, I think it is Louisiana. That's part of the Bible Belt. People are very conservative Baptists of a sort who try to adhere to the fundamental teachings of their religion. Now, they all want to keep the word marriage for people who are heterosexual because of their own religious views, I don't feel it's worth having a civil war over, provided that those who are not said to be married have are allowed civil unions that are equal in every respect, that it's just a verbal issue. Unfortunately, in the case of the Louisiana decision, they banned both civil unions and homosexual marriage. So that's a complication. But I wasn't talking about that. So why don't you go ahead?
No, I just think that it might be that, in theory, it might sound like reasonable. Oh, you know, if they don't want to use marriage, then let's just give them the same rights and just call it something else. But I think that's just like avoiding the conflict and like. It
is trying to save face. I agree. It is trying to avoid the conflict. Not all issues have to lead to as much agitation and misery as this one seems to be on the way to do. I always felt that if President Kennedy had been the president at the time that Lincoln was elected, we might not have had a civil war. He might, because his practice was to get everybody to talk, to bring them in and try to work things out, and if necessary, to bring in the National Guard, as he did in the question of black children being admitted to the University of Mississippi. In other words, education. He brought in, that was taking strong military action. But prior to that, he was very, very prone to negotiation. And I don't think Lincoln was. I don't think Lincoln was a good president in that respect. You know, he was admirable in other ways, but I don't think he knew how to handle the situation. And in general, these deep problems like abortion, slavery, same-sex marriage are very difficult to resolve and not worth resolving the way that the slavery issue was, where 600,000 men were killed and whole parts of the country devastated, and the country in turmoil for 4 and even more years. Not that I think that they should have tolerated slavery, but it didn't have to lead to a civil war.
But I think,
or I would hope it wouldn't have.
in my opinion, I think the whole civil union thing that you propose might be a good way to, like, just institute that for the time being, and then keep the lines of communication, I guess, open and keep talking to, like, build up to the point where.
On the model of the Netherlands, I mentioned that. In the Netherlands, first there was civil unions and then there was marriage. But if there is going to be a large public sentiment against even civil union, then that's a complication, and then I'm not sure I know what to say.
I think there is. Right? I mean, I think, like, unfortunately, a lot of these people are against homosexuality itself, right? And think that
against in what way?
Well, I think in largely a religious sense.
No, but I mean, is it that they don't want their children to be one? They don't want their children to marry one? I think that they feel it would be bad for society, and would also not be right for them to even tolerate it. But they have,
right, in the same way.
But it's already tolerated because all of the anti-gay laws have been taken off the books in terms of behavior and lifestyle. Until recently, being homosexual was a criminal act. And now it isn't.
So is abortion, right? But I wouldn't really call either of these things tolerated. I mean, they're tolerated by the law, sure.
Oh, well, but that's what we're talking about.
The societal issue.
There's a complication here. It's not a question of whom you like, because people, in a sense, may not tolerate homosexuality, that they will be free to show their dislike of those who engage in it, and to teach their children, say to children, oh, you must never do this sort of thing. That's a First Amendment freedom. People have a right to that, and the same sense, and the same is true about their their feelings of any sort. I mean, they may not like Jews, so they may not like Catholics. I don't like my colleagues. That doesn't mean that doesn't mean that they should be prevented from going on and living their own life. We're free to have any feelings we want. When it comes to actions, then that's decided by the Constitution and the laws and the structure of society. The way the attitude toward homosexuality is now handled is that it is tolerated insofar as it's no longer illegal. It wasn't tolerated until fairly recently because it was then criminal. Decriminalizing it, see, is a kind of toleration. The question of marriage is a form of toleration that we're talking about. So could you clarify what you want to say in terms of that distinction?
Well, I guess we're talking about a case in which like all forms of like homosexual civil union were declared illegal, right? In Mississippi or Louisiana or Louisiana,
Massachusetts.
Right? We had concluded, right?
In Massachusetts, I don't know when it stopped, but I remember when I got married, it was something of interest. Any kind of anal intercourse between a husband and a wife, for instance, was illegal. Adultery was illegal. There were all sorts of laws against intimate behavior that went back to the Puritans, who thought that God had prescribed these things as evil. Now, by now they're all lawful, and they've been taken out of the law books. And the same thing about homosexuality. No, I'm sorry, go on.
Well, I guess I was just saying, I think, I think Massachusetts is kind of the exception to the rule in a lot of these cases, right? I mean, it tends to be pretty liberal, right? But I mean, I think a lot of these Bible Belt states and so forth, the people who make the laws, I think, are often of this opinion that homosexuality itself is inherently wrong.
Yeah,
and that it would be wrong for them to even tolerate it.
Right. The law is tolerated in that sense in Massachusetts. I don't know what the laws in the southern states are, but the federal law has decriminalized that kind of relationship. That's the crucial thing.
Okay.
But what was your main point? That it's a fact of homosexuality that the present agitation is really about?
So I mean, I think so. Like my personal opinion, right, is like I have no qualms about about like people being homosexual and like getting married and stuff, right? I don't feel that hurts me in any way, right? So like I would be in full support of civil unions and even full marriage to some extent, right? But I mean, I guess I'm just trying to get in the mind of someone who is against even civil unions, right? And try to understand why would they be against even this thing where they're trying to sort of sterilize marriage and take all the religious things out of it and make it just the legal and sort of practical benefits to being married. And I guess I can only understand that in the context of thinking that homosexuality itself is actually evil.
No, I think you're probably right, that that's what their view is. And that's why it's such a difficult thing to resolve, because how can you convince somebody that he should allow the laws to tolerate something that's evil? But and that makes the issue comparable to abortion, because but then the laws do tolerate it. They can try to get a change in the Supreme Court decision, but as of now, they haven't yet done it. I think it might be possible that same-sex marriages and same-sex civil unions will not be tolerated in that sense for many, many years, simply because there seems to be such a backlog of resistance to it particularly in a large part of the country. Which is your state?
I'm from New Jersey.
Oh, New Jersey is probably more liberal, but people from California would be more tolerant, I would think. People from Hawaii, very much so, because Hawaii gets close to allowing same-sex marriage. But in the Florida or Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, those states, maybe they'll never come around to that.
Do you think they'll never come around? I mean, the issue has always seemed to me as kind of one of inevitability. I don't know. I just think if you go back in history and look at all these big societal issues and changes, like the people who try to resist it lose every time. It seems to me. I don't know.
Well, not all of those issues. Actually, can anyone think of one that in which people?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know of an example also. Right, would it look like, I don't know, was there like a cannibalist movement at some point? I don't know.
However,
I think you go back and look at slavery or abortion or civil rights, or look at where stem cell research and all those. It seems to me like the side that tries to resist these types of things like loses always. I don't know.
Maybe that's true. But this is one that is very deeply rooted, because by defining yourself as homosexual or heterosexual, you're really getting to the roots of your feelings, the roots of your being. That's why this whole area of philosophy is, for me, so important, because that seems to me the kind of question that philosophers should be trying to resolve. Who are we? What are we? How do we determine what our feelings are and how we should adjust to those feelings or make the feelings adjust to something else? But it's so difficult and so complicated that, or so maybe embarrassing, I don't know, philosophers have ignored it. But that, for me, was the big challenge, and I hope you feel that way, too. Stavros.
Yeah, I just wanted to point out that even if they make it a civil union, I still don't think that's good, because, for instance, okay, they will have equal rights according to the law, but they will be socially stigmatized. Like if they want to apply for something, and they'll say, are you married? Yes, no, or civilly united. And if you just inevitably, there will still be social racism against them until you can just make sure that they're equalized.
It's hard to know. It
depends on who's going to get that application or whatever, but it seems like...
I feel like that would also fall under like the equal opportunities, can't discriminate against someone based on like their race, ethnicity, physical abilities, or if they're married or civilly union,
No, but, in all of these movements, there are two attitudes among groups who are liberating themselves, whether they're Jews or blacks or Latinos or Asians. One is to want to assimilate with everybody else, to be treated just like everybody else, right? So that there is great sensitivity if somebody if an authority, for instance, even a professor, calls attention to the color of somebody else's skin, because then, wow, he's categorizing me, he's treating me as whatever it is, and I want to be treated like everybody else. On the other hand, once that has been established, what happens in the dynamics of this process of self-discovery, liberation, and ultimate equalization is a realization that unity brings about strength. And so if you're black, you join the NAACP, or you vote for black representatives for your district, that there is the black vote in Congress, because otherwise there won't be any political power, and the interests of people who happen to be black, whatever that means by black, because in this country, anybody who is brown or tan or anything tend to be called black, but not really black. But all of that's lumped together, and the only way to get equalization is by identifying yourself as the minority that you don't want to be stigmatized by. And it's a very delicate and difficult process for a young person to go through. I know because I was born Jewish, and part of me wanted to go out in the world and be like all the Anglo-Saxons. My parents were immigrants, and their hope was for me, at any cost, to go out and succeed in the outside world of America. The process of Americanization, all of the immigrants went through that. At the same time, you always feel, well, you're denying your origins, and then as you get older, you realize how much of you is a function of your origins, and it's a question of how to adjudicate. And if you don't agree with a religion, and I never did think or thought of myself as Jewish in terms of religion, and you are out in the world and don't live with the Jews and their habits don't mean that much to you, what are you supposed to do? It's a great problem, particularly when you're young, because youth and adolescence is a time of discovering yourself and what are you, right? Okay, now the same thing is even more so, I think, in the question of sexuality. So that how can a young person know whether he or she really is homosexual or heterosexual or anything? And yet, now I'm beginning to forget what your original point was. Why do we go back to that?
My point was that I don't think a civil union would be a satisfactory solution.
Oh, no, I see now what it was. I remember now what touched this off. When I was in the Army, they issued me dog tags. I don't know if they still use them. There literally are dog tags, metal tags like that. Are you in the ROTC?
Yes.
Huh?
Yes.
Is there a letter for your religious affiliation?
Yes.
Okay. It's P or C?
No, they spell it out.
Oh, in my case, it was just lettering. If you were Protestant, it was a P, and if you were Catholic, it was a C. And that made sense, because if somebody got killed in battle, one had to know where to bury him, or use a cross or a star, or what kind of preacher or priest to say the final rites, right? In my case, my metal tag said H, which meant Hebrew. And I never thought of myself as a Hebrew. There was even something, I remember one time being in the South in America, and somebody on the bus that I was on was furious at a ticket agent or something, and he was shouting, that Hebrew. And it wasn't the man was Jewish or anything, it's just that it was a curse word. He's a Hebrew. He probably had never met a Jew. And I knew that, but I was 17 or 18, and I felt hurt by it. So that H was, not something I would have identified myself with. But, of course, now looking back, of course I'm Jewish. That's the way I grew up. So much of my life is a function of that early origin. I can live with that. That's my point. Being told that I can't get married, or doesn't apply to me, but if somebody is told that he can't get married legally, but he can have a civil union, would, I think, be as insignificant as having the letter H on his dog tag. Anyhow, in your case it says, are you Protestant or Catholic?
Atheist.
Which?
Atheist.
Atheist. Why do there's no atheist that you can claim to be?
No, they read it on there.
Oh, they are? Oh, on yours it says atheist.
They spell it on there.
Oh, that's interesting, because I thought if it was Protestant, you might say, well, I'm not a Protestant, I'm a Wesleyan or Episcopalian or Presbyterian or Methodist or Baptist. What's this Protestant stuff? Or if a Catholic, Well, there are different kinds of Catholics,
They've expanded that.
but atheist seems very explicit.
Yeah, they've expanded the religious core, like in the Navy, from I don't know, they used to have like 5, now they're up to like 30 plus. They even have like Wiccan. That's like.
Well, then my point isn't quite as relevant. I was thinking that one could live with this artificial denomination that they've given you, H or P or whatever, but A is something more explicit. So on philosophical grounds, we could argue about what it is to be an atheist, but you could live with the ambiguity. And where A could, it says atheist, not agnostic. It's not an A. Atheist, okay. Whatever it is, you could live with that artificial categorization. Who cares? And the same thing with being called, having a relationship that's called a civil union. It would be a sort of joke, provided you get the same rights and privileges and are understood to have the same responsibilities, but you're not an M. You're a C, or
Well, I mean,
a CU instead of an M.
no, but that's not. My point is that okay. So let's say you had a card, and they asked you, "What would you be when you filled out an application?" First, I'm just bringing this as an example. Do you think it's correct for them to have a question? What is your religion? If it's to apply for a job, to apply for a position, for something, do you think that they should have like a question that says, "What is your religion?"
I think that is no longer legal. It used to be.
Yeah. So
It is legal?
You can't ask.
You can't ask. That's what I meant. It's no longer to ask for religion. And the reason was that there has been religious discrimination in all countries, but in this country until very recently, and still in this country, but it's something the government recognizes is illegal, undesirable.
Exactly.
Right? In the case of marriage, if you had equal rights for the M's and for the CUs, that too could be something you can't require on an application form. It was a little like the policy of don't ask and don't tell for homosexuals in the armed forces. They can't ask whether somebody is homosexual because he might be discriminated against, or she, and they don't. They're advised, or maybe they're not supposed to tell. It's nobody's business.
yeah, I mean, okay. So my point is, well, they still ask if you're married or not.
When?
But as Veronica was pointing out,
I mean, anything financial is very relevant whether you're married or not.
That's-
right?
Lots of things that have to do with the economy.
yeah, that's.
I don't think
But I don't feel
necessarily
like
it's so
with
common
the
outside of
civil
that.
union that would work just as much as a marriage, because the only reason they're asking if you're married is because they want to know, do you have another income working with yours? So if you have a civil union, that's the same thing. You would still have the other income. So I don't see how they would be able to discriminate based on that, because it's simply like a financial matter, not like.
Okay, the financial. Didn't they ask you for the MIT application if you were married or not?
I think that's because of housing.
Well, yeah,
it was
no.
more- and you, I feel like you didn't have to answer that. Like,
Oh,
it
well,
was
no,
like,
but
would you
No,
really,
but it doesn't
like,
mean
would
that
they
it-
have like not let you
No,
in if you were
that's
married?
for the units that accommodate married couples. But couldn't you also have access to them because you want to live with somebody you're not married to?
No, I don't think so.
You don't? If
I think you have to.
I mean, there are double apartments, so to speak, or one-bedroom apartments for married people, right? And there's not for a couple who are unmarried. They're excluded. I would think that would be a legal issue. MIT would be in trouble.
Well, I think
That would be discrimination on the
I think
basis.
they have limited amounts of that housing, and they give it preferentially to people who are married and who have children. And usually, I think that if you
Oh, children complicates things because that's another head.
Yeah, exactly. And so I think if you just want to live with someone, they would probably, like, they wouldn't have enough spaces for those types of things.
I'm pretty sure the housing laws in Boston are such that you can't ask whether the occupants are married or living together in some relationship, that's discrimination. You can ask for the number of occupants, But you'd be discriminating if you said, well, I don't rent to homosexuals, or I don't rent to people who might be engaged in sex without being married or something. That would be discrimination. In fact, that would, I'm sure this is what the gay liberationist movement would say, what I'm going to say now, that the reason against banning same-sex marriage is its discrimination on the basis of, lifestyle. And isn't that one of the things that the Supreme Court ruled out? That they cannot, the federal Supreme Court, that there cannot be discrimination on the basis of lifestyle. Just as there can't be discrimination on the basis of religion or ethnic origin. Well, why not the lifestyle? Since the lifestyle, see, that's the paradox in this. The lifestyle is now tolerated legally because in the federal laws and some of the states, maybe most of the states now, your behavior at home is nobody's business. What you do in bed is nobody else's business. So it's tolerated. But then, if that's true, why wouldn't you have a responsibility to tolerate the lifestyle of people who engage in such behavior?
So is the term marriage actually religious?
The origin, I suppose, is religious, and it could still be. You might. That's one solution, to delegalize all marriages. That marriage is a private activity. You can go and get married in a church if you want, and it's for the church to decide whom they will give the marriage to, but it doesn't affect the legal rights and responsibilities.
Is it a specific religion, however?
It would have to be in the, if you go to one religion, they might tolerate marriage. If you go to another, they might not. So the Catholic clergy might refuse to marry people who are homosexual or overtly homosexual.
That's my point, though. Is that
But the Episcopalian probably would, because they now have a bishop who's overtly homosexual and living in a permanent relationship with another man.
But if you have a freedom of religion in the United States, you can have whatever religion you desire. So you can get married under whatever religion, whatever religious beliefs you have.
You could
why is that a problem?
You can even have a homosexual religion, which to participate you have to be homosexual, and that in that religion you could be made as married as anybody else. The question is whether any of these opportunities or alternatives should have a special legal status, which is the present situation. Presently, the only marriages that are legally accepted in the United States are the ones that take place not in church necessarily, but between people who have different sexes.
I have a question. So, because priests and people within different religions are, I guess, recognized by the law to perform a marriage, so when they perform the marriage, it's also recognized that they can sign a form or something like that? Is that how it works? That
A form doing what?
That will also legalize the marriage to the state. Is this true?
The marriage
You
certificate.
sign a marriage license when you get married.
Yeah, but does the priest
But
have
the
any
priest
sort
has to be
of,
certified.
No, priest, the Catholic priest.
or any sort of minister or whatever? Do they actually sign the legal form that makes according to the state?
Oh,
they
yeah.
say, oh, the priest
Right.
says they got married.
Yeah, right. I mean, they get divorced.
The priest has to be certified to be
Protestant-
Okay, exactly. So my question is, if we were to legalize marriage for homosexuals, would it be discrimination for these priests to say that I will not marry you? Because technically, to the state, they are I guess, advocates of the state to perform some sort of
Service.
Well, all right,
service.
your point is,
So-
if a Catholic priest wants to marry a man, his church will not allow that and might even defrock him. But there would be nothing to stop him from getting married in court, and that would be legal. But that's presently the case.
No, I mean,
Priests do get defrocked.
Actually, what I was trying to say was, would a priest be required to marry a homosexual couple.
I thought for himself you would
No,
say.
would he be like,
officiate with the marriage?
Yes, officiate with the marriage, even if he didn't want to, simply because if he didn't, he would
I don't see.
They don't marry. They don't even marry people who have been like. You have to have your marriage annulled in order for the Catholic Church to marry you. Like even if you're divorced but the marriage isn't annulled, they won't marry you. So I have no doubt in my mind that they won't marry homosexuals.
No, but the point is that it doesn't matter what the church does. The question is what is legal.
Right.
So the church might say that we won't marry a homosexual couple, but the couple can go and be legally married like anybody else.
Right.
Well, I think the question is, since the priest in this case is licensed by the state, is he therefore kind of an agent of the state and therefore practicing discrimination as an agent of the state in not marrying homosexual couples or whatever other is wrong with that?
Is our priests an agent of the state?
Well, I think that's the question.
No, I don't think they are.
Okay.
I think marriage in church is one thing and marriage in court is another.
The question is, what is entailed by this becoming certified by the state to marry people? You can go on the internet and get certified to do it for $15 or something.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it's becoming like less of an issue. But I mean, yeah, I think before that was the case, then I think this was I think this is a very valid question. Like the internet thing aside, right? If it were hard to get the certification, right? If you had to be a priest in, a church or the steeple and stuff.
But you can get married by a judge, and I guess that's what like homosexuals would like. Even if marriage was legalized, and they were like, I mean, if they were Catholic and they wanted to get married, they probably wouldn't be getting married in the church. They would get married by the judge. I mean, my dad was divorced before he got married, and my mom and my dad got married, and they weren't married by the Catholic Church until I was like 10. But that didn't mean that they weren't married.
So I mean, I guess the issue is, MIT isn't allowed to discriminate against homosexual couples, right? Why is the church?
Oh, because the church is a private institution. It's like a club. You can have a club that excludes people you don't like.
Well, MIT excludes people without high enough SAT scores, right?
No. MIT is a non-profit institution that receives a great deal of money from the government.
Okay.
If it were just a private club, that would be different. So even there, I don't know nowadays whether people could, I don't see how they could claim discrimination if they're not admitted to some club in view of their religion. No, if it's a purely private club, I think you can, it's like a friendship. You can have any friends you want. Government can't tell you who your friends must be. If, however, there is government funding, and if it is as it's a tax-free status, that's very different. So the church, I think, could argue, well, we are purely private, except that, of course, they may find ways of getting money from the government, but that's to be debated. And so they can decide whom they will marry and whom they won't. And one of the solutions to the problem would be to delegalize marriage as a whole. And anybody who wants to get married can do so in his or her religion or by sending in the $15 on the internet. And there are no preferential benefits to be got from the government. There's no official legal status. It's simply one of the things people do. You could belong to an atheist society. It's just, with people of similar thinking. That's not a legal matter. That would be one solution. It's very complicated, first because of the primordial condition of sexuality. That's why I wanted to start with this instead of ending with it at the end of the course. that sex is so deeply embedded in our being and our conception of ourselves. And one reason I am such a severe critic of Freud, about whom I've written, I don't know, well over 100 pages. I'm a critic of Freud's because he was a genius who dared first to handle this kind of question and was very inventive and wrong in many respects. But it was such a startling achievement that we have inherited all of this, all of the mythology and the loose thinking of Freud. And I could see through that, and treating him as a philosopher, I found him very wanting, right? But he certainly is responsible for our realizing how deep sexuality is in us, you know, whether or not his account of it is correct. And I think that's what makes the homosexual question so, particularly the homosexual marriage section, so important, because marriage is a long-standing institution that embodies a whole system of values, and it's going to take the world quite a while to straighten out its philosophy of value in order to get this problem in order. And second, because of the question of the family. I don't do a great deal of research for the writing I do, particularly nowadays. I rely on my own intuition, my own logic to make ideas clear, and in terms of my own feelings of what's important. I don't usually write paper articles in public policy the way this one is, but if I feel it strongly enough, and in this case, as I mentioned last time, I felt after all these years I can speak with some kind of authority, and why aren't I speaking up, right? So I will speak up the way John Dewey, my hero, would have done, as I told you. But nevertheless, despite my ignorance of what other people have been writing, I don't think there's been much done about the concept of the family as such, what it is to be a family, what is the significance of families in human nature, and the relationship to families of other creatures. You know, all animals, certainly all mammals, live in families.
I feel like there has been some writing on it simply because I know there's a class here at MIT called the Contemporary American Family.
Oh, in sociology and anthropology, there is now some interest.
And so I feel like they're probably reading.
But the philosophy of the family is something that has been neglected. And my point here is that part of the difficulty in this issue of gay marriage is that it's linked to our thinking about the nature of a family. And that's why I referred to George W. Bush's speech, was it about a year ago or so, a year and a half, in which he said that marriage exists between one man and one woman, all right? And then he slipped into talking about the family, that this is the nature of a family, this is what government should be defining itself into. And in that part of my essay, you remember that section? I want to separate the concepts because it doesn't follow that families and marriages depend on each other. You can have a family without having a legal marriage. You can have a legal marriage and not have a family if you don't have any children. But the word is loose because a man and a woman who never have children but are married, they might refer to their family in terms of themselves alone. You know, that they are the family, the husband and wife without children. But usually the word family includes children, relatives, cousins, people who are interwoven in some kind of social unit. And it could even be hangers-on, you know, servants who, in the old days at least, servants who were too old to work, but they were still a part of the family, so they kept living with the others, even though there was no blood relationship. So the limits are vague, but that seems to me to be the proper use of the concept of family, and the relationship to marriage isn't analyzed, and I wanted to separate them two, as against Bush, who was uniting them. Well, that fact that the concept of family is so vaguely interwoven with the concept of marriage makes it harder yet to resolve this. And I'm sure lots of people in America until very, very recently couldn't imagine there being homosexual families. You mean 2 men, 2 women, not 1 and 1, and not even not the parents, maybe adopted? Is that a family? It's not a real, it's very unclear. So this is in need of a lot of analysis and digestion in the values that will finally bring about some kind of resolution. But I don't know if any of you know a poem by Frost, Robert Frost, in which the line appears, home is where, when you come back to it, they've got to take you in. Now, I think that's part of the idea of family. If you're a part of the family, even if you sinned, if you've been in prison, if you were a derelict, if you're wayward, the prodigal son, if you come back home, they accept you as belonging there because you're part of the family. And then this gets to be very important, of course, in other respects. In the mafia always talks about itself as the family. There are people like us who we can communicate with. So the concept of family is in need of a great deal of analysis. Maybe you'll be able to do that. I don't know anybody who has done it right.
I feel like in general, though, the United States has already started to accept a different concept of the family. I mean, you kind of touch on it in this introduction, but I mean, already the idea of, 2 parents getting a child through like artificial insemination or things like that. I mean, no one questions the fact when that child grows up that those are her parents and that is the family and that is the home where the child will be accepted back into. And I mean, even the same with, divorced parents and single families and things like that. Those are pretty much completely accepted everywhere.
In America, everywhere in America.
Yes, in America.
But America is not representative even of the Western world. And if you bring in the Eastern world, or Middle Eastern world, the Third World, their idea of a family is very different, such that if a young lady, a daughter, wants to marry somebody that the family don't approve of, she won't marry him. That she has to marry for reasons that are acceptable to the family. And in the Middle Ages, marriage was strictly controlled by the family, and that meant for political and economic benefit to the family. And in ruling classes and royalty, even now among the few remaining countries that have royals, they marry not purely out of love, and sometimes not out of love at all, but because it makes sense in terms of the family. So there's a very different conception from what exists in the United States.
But I guess I was just trying to say that the conception of family in the United States is what's going to control the acceptance of homosexual families here. And I think we're already leaning more towards that acceptance based on the radical changes in what we've seen in families just since, the 1950s.
I disagree. I don't think it's going to be the family. I think it's more just going to be acceptance of the homosexual in a religious context.
No, but I mean, as far as taking in
already accepted the family. Is what the issue is.
Yeah, I mean, as far as taking in like the idea that they can get the other rights that a family would have once we've, obviously gotten past that.
So what do you think is going to be the key?
Because, we already have had to say basically that to an extent we legally accept homosexuality. So now it's whether or not that acceptance that we've taken is really going to be allowed to go a step further to create the family through marriage.
So that's a legal acceptance, though. It wasn't a religious
Well,
one.
I think it's
Most of the opposition comes from religion. When people voice their opinions, it's more religious groups that oppose it in such a grand way, thus that the voters will, later control what the way the congressmen go because they want to be reelected. So a strong religious group that has numbers is going to more control where that goes.
I think politically, like George W. Bush can't say, I don't want homosexual marriage because, like, I don't think, like, homosexuals should be able to marry because, like, I don't like homosexuals. Like, he can't say that. So, like, what he has to say is that, it's bad for society as a whole. And
Right.
the way he says that is because it's bad for the family. So, I think, like, you have a point about the source of the problem is religious acceptance, but I think from a practical and political standpoint, like, very much the family is very deeply entwined with the issue.
Incidentally, speaking of Bush, Kerry's attitude is a kind of compromise. He doesn't want to alienate religious people, and maybe not even the Catholic following that he inherits because he's Catholic. So when he was asked, he said no, he doesn't believe in homosexual gay marriage because the church is against it, but he does believe in civil unions, right? So that's a way of not entirely alienating the gay voters, while he's also trying to hold on to the religious one. Well, that's a kind of compromise. Bush is more extreme. He doesn't want gay marriage, and I'm sure he doesn't want civil union, or if he does, he's not going to say it. And he brings in the idea of the family, and that's just a sheer confusion.
Didn't Cheney said that he would be pro-marriage anyway?
He came
He
out,
has a gay daughter.
yeah, and he came out in opposition to the president.
Right. So wouldn't that? I mean,
But
politically,
previously, he
yeah.
hadn't said anything like that.
Right. So like, wouldn't that just? I guess the political machine. Like, I guess if they know that Cheney's like totally pro the whole marriage thing, like the whole. I think Kerry might have to change his stance. Just.
Oh, you think this might hurt Bush's chances
I
because?
think it might help Bush's chances just because.
No, but what if Bush dies and then Cheney comes in and permits gay marriages?
No, I just think that. No, I'm just. This is
His
completely off
wife,
topic.
and daughter, who apparently both are, of course, in favor of gay marriages. I mean, the daughter would be, but apparently his wife was, before he made his view public. They gang up on him, and he ends up supporting gay marriage. So you would think people with a little foresight might worry about that.
I think like anybody who's like very like religiously inclined might worry about the whole like Cheney thing, but people that are trying to look for a happy medium might just go for the Bush-Cheney combination because if they need to agree, like if they both come into power, they're going to have to like talk it out, and they're going to be the ones that are going to be putting the foundation of like what's going to actually happen.
I don't know.
Technically.
It's another kind of compromise, a different kind from Kerry's. That's true.
No, Cheney has power over other things, but over gay marriage, probably.
I think it's really interesting, right, that Dick Cheney is one of the most, like, infamous Darth Vader right-wing hawks there is, right? And yet when it comes to this issue, when it really personally affects him, right, he's way on the other side of the issue, right? I just think that that's really interesting, and an interesting way to think about a lot of issues, like when people try to, have these really, really conservative views on them, how many of them are really personally affected by it.
But Nereda's view is that this might be a shrewd political compromise, so that people who want to be Republican can always point to Bush if they're against gay marriage, and if they want to be Republican but are for gay marriage, they can always point to Cheney. I think that might be right. It's like talking out of both sides of your mouth.
I think
Which politicians do very often. Politicians do very regularly.
That should be the reason. Well, in a normal, if people, I follow people voters' logic was normal. I think that should be a bad thing because it shows that they have a double standard and that they disagree with something unless it affects them. Obviously, if Bush suddenly was left paralyzed, he would be all for stem cell research, but.
I think we've diverted from our topic.
Yeah.
Well, why don't we take a break, and afterwards Veronica will give a presentation on the pursuit of love. Right? Don't stay away long. 5 minutes.
That's what I kind of wanted to start with. You did indeed. What I kind of wanted to start with was what the chapter that interested me most, which was the chapter, The Two Myths About Love, which basically dealt with the first myth had to do about love basically being a universal thing that we feel just because we're humans, and that it explains the reason for our existence in the way that we always are. And then the second myth with the idea that love brings about a merging of two identities, and that two people become like one and form a union. And I guess that kind of summarizes the two main ideas that are being opposed, I guess, generally throughout the chapter.
What do you think about those?
With the second, I'll start with the second one because I have kind of more ideas against the first. But with the second one, I think I generally agree with the idea that two people still remain independent after they fall in love or whatever happens, and that there's not exactly any type of merging, because you still are your own person with your own ideas. And I think the term interdependence does more greatly qualify the experience. However, you do say that that there is no creation of a new self or of a new person. And maybe I'm just not understanding exactly in what way you mean that, but I feel like most people who have been in any sort of long-term relationship or married or anything like that would say that they have changed as a result of their experiences, and that you do act in a way that you wouldn't if you hadn't been in that relationship. And although you do make your own decisions and form your own opinions, you do so greatly based on the situation that you're in, that you are different. Because if at that moment in time you were single or, something else, you would not be acting in that way.
Notice that you're now are talking about a change having happened, and I don't deny that. And you're saying that you are a different person. What I was denying was that there would be a change of the sort that is built into the concept of merging, and second, that there is a third person different from the two people who are merging, resulting from the relationship, so that there is another self, but it isn't as if, so that's what I'm questioning, both of that. But I don't deny that people change because of their relationships, and that they become different selves, just that they're not part of this new supercell, so to speak, which is true in nature. I think I give the example of sodium chloride making salt, or two rivulets merging in a stream, or a scrambled egg. That's a good example. You can't separate the albumin from the yolk once it's been scrambled, right? Is that what it's like to be in love? And the answer is yes, according to the romantic theory, which thinks of love as this overwhelming experience in which you are taken out of yourself. And that, I think, is a very common idea. I think it's the most common idea. And people who somehow don't feel they've merged adequately feel they're maybe not really in love. It's the basis of a great deal of philosophy and great art. some of which you're going to be watching in this class, because when we get to 19th century philosophy of Nietzsche, for instance, and of Wagner, Richard Wagner, the opera composer, we'll watch a documentary about Tristan und Isolde, Wagner's opera, which is all about merging. And the words that the lovers use in their love duet is no more Tristan, no more Isolde, that those old persons don't exist. There is just this new merged unity that they have become. And that is what I deny. That's what I claim is not capable in human beings. It's capable in rivers and in chemicals, but not in human beings. As far as the changing is concerned, you reminded me of something that a professor I had at Harvard used to say about a man and his dog. The man walks the dog every night, and they get so bound up together, the man ends up walking like the dog. And you find this often with married couples who have been together a long time, and they somehow walk the same way, and they finish each other's sentences. They are sharing their being with each other, but it isn't quite emerging, because if that were true, they would no longer be persons. And with other animals, even though we get very close to them, they're still very different from us. But you can love your dog, you can love your cat, but that you're merged is not, and I'm continually reminded of that with my cat. One of the issues that, I don't know if I discussed in this book, but it's an issue I discussed in other books and some recent philosophers have discussed. Robert Solomon, for instance, who claims that animals don't love, and we don't really love animals. But I love my cat loves me, and I can tell when his gestures are loving and when they're not. When they're loving, he gives me velvet paws. He retracts his claws and sometimes strokes my face and even kisses me all over. Occasionally when he's lying on the bed and I walk by, he'll put out his arm just to touch me. And that's love. I don't know what more to say about it, or even what more to expect of another human being. But at other times, if I reciprocate with him and he's not, I don't do it quite right, I suppose, or he's not in the mood, his claws will come out and he won't attack me, but I will feel the claws as an indication, don't forget, I may be smaller than you, and you can do me harm, but don't try it. I'm not your subservient creature. We don't merge with animals the way the theory goes, and we don't merge with other human beings because they also can have claws that you might not have recognized. And if they didn't, we wouldn't love them. They would just be sort of puppets or terribly supine creatures. So that there is the dual capacity to share their lives and to withhold themselves. And that's very different from the concept of merging, which I think is the prevalent concept among people who believe in romantic love with a capital R, coming out of the 19th century, flourishing throughout the 19th century and into the 20th, and nowadays back and forth, as I point out in the first chapter, being something we're suspicious of, but also something we give ourselves to. I haven't done any sociological work with popular arts, low cultures it's called, but I would think that if you tabulated the songs or the elements of songs or whatever units you as a scientist, sociological scientist, focus on in order to make a generalization, you would find that there's a mixture. Sometimes it's this desire to give yourself or even to merge, and then at other times it's disappointment and withholding, and that we fluctuate back and forth. So that on the one hand, you can imagine any number of romantic popular songs, I don't know, about merging. Can anyone think of one right offhand? I can think of one that I'm fond of, which is Bob Dylan's song. Your generation still know who Bob Dylan is? And sung by Joan Baez, who, you know her, you don't remember her. She was a great, and still is, a wonderful folk singer. When I was young, she started out, and it was a real revelation what a genius she was in folk music. And there's a Bob Dylan song that she sings called "It Ain't Me, Babe." You know that? You want somebody who will always be there for you. It ain't me, babe. You want somebody you can trust completely, somebody who will stand by you, somebody who will, support you in everything, something who will pour out her love. I'm fabricating because I don't remember the exact words, but the refrain is, "It ain't me, babe," and then her voice gets lower. "It ain't me, babe," and that seems to me what love always poses as a potentiality, that the claws of the cat can always come out as a way of asserting his separateness from me. And that's why I attack the concept of merging in romanticism.
I think I tend to agree, though, with the rest of the
Pardon?
things I tend to agree with the rest of what you have to say about the merging. I guess I just wasn't very clear on that one point that you were making, because I think the idea that was stated somewhere about trying to find the person that is just like you and your alter ego who you will mesh with, that's, I think, obviously not the case, because many a times it's the differences between people that make them,
Right.
so compatible, is that you don't want to be with someone who's just like you in every single aspect, because that's boring.
Now that idea that you love someone different from yourself is a common one, and it fits in with my idea of sharing, that the rough man and truck driver, macho type, he falls in love with a gentle woman because he knows he's not gentle and feels an inadequacy. She supplements him, and she falls in love with him because he's big and strong and will take care of her. That there's a kind of compensation that you get from the other person that you couldn't have got except in a unity. Now, the unity can take place in a marriage, and often the contribution of different assets makes it a stable marriage. For there to be love, the unity has to be more deeply embedded in some kind of union. It's not just she relying on him for protection, him relying on her for children he wants, or his being rugged and her being beautiful. It's got to be a richer exchange, and to explain that richer exchange, I introduced the concepts of bestowal and appraisal, which I touch on here, and I won't launch into until you've had more chance. But to finish my sentence, the trilogy, The Nature of Love, 1,400 pages, which I don't assign to you because that would be too much, though I have in previous courses, and people seem to get something out of them, but that's a different kind of course. The trilogy starts out with a chapter on the distinction between appraisal and bestowal, and then the whole rest of it, that's the guiding theme. That's the dominant to which the rest of the chapters return, about appraisal and bestowal as constructive of the philosophy, as well as being a view about love that the different philosophies are about. Well, that for me is a way of showing how this sharing takes place. And we'll come back to it. But why don't we go to what you were saying about the first merging? I mean, the first of the two myths.
Yes. So,
unless somebody wants to interrupt.
Does anybody have any comments on that?
Well, if I can say something, I almost think that, or it's confusing to me how you say that two people cannot really merge, yet I feel as if complementary personalities being a basis for love almost prompts a merging. You can't work unless there is a merger.
There could be an intimacy because of these combined efforts, the way in which they complement each other. But if they were merged, they wouldn't really be persons anymore. They would be part of this new entity. And
I feel like also if they merged, then they wouldn't have those different things that would be able to complement anymore. That the idea that they are different automatically suggests that they can't become one thing which is the same.
do you know the novel and the movie called Wuthering Heights?
No.
None of you studied that? You do, Adriana. Do you remember the place in the novel which also comes out in at least, no, I think both of the, I know two or maybe three versions. It comes out in the movies too. The most famous of these movies is the one with Laurence Olivier and Merle Oberon, made about 1941, in which Kathy, who has fallen in love with this servant boy, who's very rough, his name is Heathcliff. She says, after he's left and after she's married somebody else whom she doesn't love that way, though they have a good marriage, she says, I am Heathcliff. I am Heathcliff. Now, I think that's the idea of merging. And for me, that's very poetic, very metaphoric. If she's saying Heathcliff is all I think about, Heathcliff is the person I should have married, Heathcliff is the one for whom I feel strong sexual passion, but not for my husband, you see. I can understand that. But that's her expressing her feelings. How does that make her Heathcliff? She is going to respond to him in a way that is distinctive of her, and he will respond to her, ideally, though it's a tragedy and it doesn't ever really work out, in a related way, but it won't be either of them being the other. And that's built into the idea of merging.
Maybe I'm just unlearned, but the whole concept of the merging just seemed completely foreign to me. Like when I read about it, I don't think it was something that at any point I've ever believed in. But to me, again, maybe I'm just young and naive, but the whole concept that you're saying with interdependence and stuff like that was much more the more natural and obvious description for me. I don't know.
Does anybody want to comment on that? I can comment on it.
Do you think that
I've never really felt that about anybody. And I'm much older than you. It isn't a question of your being young. I think it's temperamental. Some people do have that feeling. I don't want to claim that it's all a confusion on the part of these poets and philosophers who were carried away by language. I think some people really feel that and want that, desperately sometimes, pathologically even. I just want to say that the feeling is just a feeling and not a representation of what is really possible. It can be a beautiful feeling, which I've always felt is denied to me because I'm such a cold fish. I'm not a cold fish in the sense of having feelings and emotions and crying on all sorts of occasions. It's just that I don't have this feeling, which is so many other people think of as what they are, what they feel, and what they want.
And I guess because you said the claws come out any time, do you think it's kind of like feeling that way is kind of bad, kind of like setting yourself up like to be harmed?
I don't know. I think it's a bad concept because I'm a philosopher. I think it doesn't sustain analysis, but Arthur may disagree. In terms of it's a bad thing for people to have, I think probably on balance they more often get hurt than benefit from it. But then it must give a wonderfully ecstatic feeling as long as it lasts. It's just that I can't believe it lasts very long. Freud writes a great deal about his patients, you know, his case histories and the early development of his theories. And one thing he discovered was a lot of the people who come to him with their problems, and whom he classifies as neurotics or sick in some sense, that they're somehow living under a romantic dream or romantic illusion, and that they fall in love with somebody in a way that's so powerful they can't be satisfied, and the other person ditches them and they can't get over that. Now that's a reality, but one of the profound things Freud said about, well, he said many profound things, but this one is about neurosis in general. He says, neurosis must be very satisfying. It seems like a, you know, paradox, because it means being sick. Neurosis must be very satisfying in view of all the trouble that people go to in order to carry it out. Well, I think this is a good example. This falling in love and being hurt, falling in love with love, that song that Marlene Dietrich sings, must be ecstatic. It is ecstatic, I don't deny it. You know, I observe it with awe, as long as it lasts, but it doesn't usually last very long. Some sociologists have done a statistical study, and they say that most people who fall in love, literally fall in love, because that's another distinction I make between falling in love, being in love, and staying in love. We'll come back to that. But, you know, falling in love in the strong romantic sense that you all understand, and that some of you have gone through and some of you may be in right now, that it doesn't usually last more, I mean, on the average, it doesn't last more than 2 months. That's the statistical norm that they found in their sociological research. Maybe, but what a jolt it gives. You know, it's like getting drunk. And I can't say it's bad to get drunk. I can't say it's bad to have ecstatic feelings. For those who are willing to run the risk of being hurt, for those who have somehow managed to learn the secret of falling out of love, and then some people keep doing this over and over again. They fall in love, they fall out of love, they fall in love, fall out of love. Maybe it's a way of life that I am simply incapable of having. And you also being a person of intellect, you may suffer from the same disability than I am. So I can't say it's good or bad, but Freud would have said it was bad. He was an enemy of romantic love, because he says it brings about so much suffering. All these patients come to me. You know, he doesn't rub his hands with glee and say all the money I'm getting from my clients. He grieves that there are so many sick people who need his help. Well, that's the reason they need it. So, well, all I can recognize are what the facts are, and I can't start using the evaluative terms of good and bad, unless you give me a particular situation. You know, here's so-and-so who had such a brilliant career in front of him, who was a genius and who was capable of doing marvelous things and did marvelous things. He had it in him. He was so creative. The world would have benefited. And then he fell in love with a woman who ditched him, and it was so painful that he committed suicide. No, then that was bad, certainly, right? Other people grow out of it, and they learn from it, and they develop, and maybe then it's good. Veronica, you were saying something.
Could you just quickly explain your distinction between, I think you just said falling in love, being in love, and staying in love?
Okay, I don't know that I go into it.
It's not in
there.
least in the beginning.
It comes out in the third volume of the trilogy, so if you look that up in the library under those words, you might get more treatment. But I have to say, before I get to there, if you allow me, my philosophical life, as I think I mentioned last time, is in the making of distinctions. And so I start out with one distinction, see that philosophers have reified the alternatives, and they've made them into a kind of dualism that can't be resolved, and that's the big problem. And for me, the solution is to show that they interweave in a way in practical life and are presented artificially by philosophers, because that's what the brain works well at, making these alternatives. But in life, somehow life harmonizes them. So my methodological procedure, which I don't do as a matter of calculation, but seems to be the way I work, this is the way my mind works, is to make a distinction and then to attack people who carry out a similar distinction to extremes and then feel the need to harmonize the two. Having done that, I then go on to another distinction, and so, particularly in the case of love, my work is a series of distinctions, the first of which was bestowal and appraisal, then there's dependence and interdependence, then there's acceptance and rejection, then there is the sensuous and the passionate, then there is falling in love with ideals, being different from falling in love with things, or falling in love with persons, and that I do go into here, and how the three interweave in some way. All of that comes out of the trilogy too, but presented at a later period in the book. And staying in love, falling in love, and being in love are distinctions that I make, and yet they can all occur simultaneously. By falling in love, I mean a very powerful, ardent feeling that usually happens very suddenly, that changes one's whole life, and that sometimes can be so strong as a feeling that it undermines one's cognitive capacity. It's what people usually mean when they talk about love, except they mean falling in love. And then that gets to be interpreted in relation to 19th century romantic philosophy, which I spent about 200 pages on in the second volume, and which is based on the idea of merging and other concepts. And that's falling in love. You probably do know a movie called it's with Cher and Affleck. What is his name? Affleck. Yeah, Ben Affleck. In which he falls in love with her, and she doesn't feel that way towards him or anybody, and is ready to marry an older man who will take care of her. But he suddenly falls in love with her, and at one point declares himself, and she slaps him in the face. You know Cher, the kind of character that she usually portrays. She slaps him in the face, and she says, "Snap out of it." In other words, it's something that happens to you, and then you're gaga and can't see things right, but it's very strong, very powerful. It could be joyful if the other person responds. It could be hell on earth if you feel rejected, but you can't turn your back on it. You're dependent on that feeling. That's falling in love. And it usually is directly related to some sexual excitement, and sexual excitement of the sort that I call the passionate. In my analysis, very briefly, well, maybe I go into it there, I don't remember. That comes out in other books, of the sensuous and the passionate. The passionate is having a sexual feeling that is very strong, usually libidinal, that is related to the genitals, a very strong inclination, a feeling for oneness with another person. It's not cool, it's hot, right? Cool sex is what I call the sensuous, and that's result from some kind of arousal or stimulation of one of the erotic zones in one's body. And the way in which I like to illustrate that is with the short little hairs on your wrist. If you can, this is, forgive me for engaging in autoeroticism in public. It's something you can do by yourself. If you just stroke the little hairs, it's cool, it's pleasant, it's a sensuous enjoyment. There's something in the sense organs that is enjoyable. Well, that is a very important part of sex. And for some people, that's the main part of sex. They just like being stimulated. Their emotions don't get involved. It's a sensory experience rather than an emotional experience. It's cool, the way this is cooling, it's very cooling, and not hot, right? In the case of falling in love, I don't think one could really understand it if one thought of it as being sensuous. It's torrid, it's hot, it's strongly emotional, a sex drive, usually, directed toward some person that you fall in love with, or some image of a person, or whatever the sex object may happen to be. That's falling in love, right? Being in love is a different state, though one that can happen after falling in love. Very often people fall in love and then they fall out of love. And that's usually, that may be what the sociologists are usually studying when they say that love lasts only romantic love lasts only a couple of months. But there are many people who start out with that strong, powerful feeling, and then they sort of settle down. Either society forces, or their feelings about society, or forces them to get married. Maybe the woman becomes pregnant and is embarrassed to admit her condition, or they just sort of work things out in a way that they make sense out of their interdependence of living together. And they would be in love because they get to be attached to each other, and they develop as a unit. And they start thinking in comparable ways. Instead of his thinking about how to succeed in the world, he thinks about how to make a living for his family, for his wife, and possibly future children. Instead of worrying about his own self-preservation, he also worries about hers. That's being in love. But you see, it doesn't have to be torrid. It can be a phase after that, or it can be independent of that. People can be in love without ever having fallen in love. The great tradition of marriage, even in the Western world, but above all in the Eastern world, where the spouses were determined by the elders of the group or by some political or economic necessity, right? Sometimes without even knowing each other, right? Or just getting a glance at each other, but that's all. An arranged marriage through some kind of intermediary or the elders, right? That's the great majority of human marriages. It's not because of the Western romantic ideas of falling in love with somebody and being on your own to decide whom you're going to live with. There's a great tradition and Shakespeare's right in the middle in the Western world of the struggle to attain the modern democratic, individualistic, personal attachment and of a romantic sort. But that's, by and large, has not been characteristic of the human race, right? So that people who get married under those conditions may sometimes be miserable because it's a bad marriage, or they hate their husband or wife very shortly. I didn't want her. How did I get, it was good for the family, but it's not good for me. But if it's a wise family, and if it comes out of a healthy family, and the parents are wise, or whoever makes the decision, they might, or if they have good luck, they end up with just a good person, somebody they can live with very well. If they don't have any emotions, then it's what's called a marriage of convenience, so that it's convenient to the wife to have support and to get money, and to have a husband who will not beat her, but will give her children, and so it's socially advantageous. Or in France, where dualism has been a philosophy for centuries, at various points, women married a man in order to be married, and after they were married, they would take any lovers they wanted because they would be a married woman with money and so on. And the husband probably had mistresses, so either he wouldn't care, or if he's afraid of being called a cuckold, the woman would contrive that he didn't know. You see, it provided the woman being married provided her a degree of strength and independence such that she could exercise her freedom to fall in love with somebody she does want. That would be more like a marriage of convenience. But being in love would be a situation which is more like the present contemporary scene, because in America we haven't gone into these marriages of conveniences very much. People are expected to marry somebody they will love and try very hard and fail very often, and so we have an enormous marriage rate of divorce, enormous rate of divorce, and therefore a large number of remarriages. All the people who get divorced in this country generally remarry. So it isn't as if divorce is destroying marriage in this country. It's part of the perpetuation of it. It's in successive marriages. And then with your generation, there are complications because there are all of the informal marriages, trial marriages, in which people live as if they were married and then separate or don't. But the point about the American dream until recently was people would marry somebody they can be in love with, whether or not they actually fall in love. They may need a little prodding from the family. They may have a need. It would help for them to fall in love, but not completely, because then they'll end up being carried away and losing their reason. But to be sufficiently engaged so that when they do marry, they feel authentic love for the other person. That's being in love. All right? Staying in love and being in love is usually sexual, because that's what marriage is all about. Marriage is a way of approving the unlimited access to the other person, the person of the opposite sex, for sexual purposes. So that if you're promiscuous, at least the way it was in my, until recently, if you were a promiscuous woman, the society frowned on you. If you were a prostitute, meaning a professional, society considered you sinful, evil, and even criminal. But still the men kept encouraging the perpetuation of that institution. If, however, you're a woman who with her husband is very lustful and has as much sex with him as some prostitutes have with their clients, and the Kinsey report I don't know. I was surprised in one of my classes nobody knew what the Kinsey reports were. He was the first one to take polls and find out how many times people had what he called sexual outlets, and in marriage and out of marriage. And in some cases there were, I remember, 7 a day per every day of the week for married people. That may not equal what some prostitutes do, but probably maybe it's more than some. But the point is that if you're married, that's totally respectable. Nobody cares. You're married. You can do what you want in your bedroom with your husband, as long as it's consensual and he doesn't rape the wife, or she doesn't beat him into submission, or hurt him when she gets him into sadomasochistic situations. Nobody cares. So that marriage perpetuates love, and it is part of being in love, or can be, depending on the individuals. You can be in love with somebody and have a sexless marriage, which exists. But in most cases, sex is a very important part of being in love in that intermediary stage. I say intermediary because people live very long, particularly nowadays, and they're not the sexual creatures very long. The passionate sex is directly related to hormones, above all testosterone in the men, and progestin and estrogen in the woman, and those are all geared to reproductive necessities. So estrogen is at a peak in women just before the period of ovulation, so that she'll get excited and available, and then in her luteal phase, which is the menopause, not the menopause, the menstrual part of the period, it won't be estrogen, it'll be other chemicals, so that she isn't excited, because that's not a good time to become fertilized, right? So that passionate sex is surely geared to the requisite hormones in men and in women. They're different in men and from women, but still the hormones are important for passionate sex. Sensuous sex you can have forever, because it means somebody's stroking you, or you're feeling sensuous pleasures, especially if they're related to your genitals, but there may not be much that's happening to your feelings, and eventually there may not be much that's going to be happening in the genitals because of the diminution of the hormones. If you live long enough, and if you become intimate enough, not talking sexually, but if you become close enough and interpenetrate enough and share your life enough with another person, if you depend on each other in this interdependent way that I talk about, you may very well outlast the period of sexual excitement, but you won't care anymore. You know, if you had a choice at that age between going back to the days when the man, for instance, gets excited by a beautiful young girl walking by, or not having that excitement, but having your beloved wife with you, the wife that you've had for the last 60 years, let's say they're in their 80s, and whom you can't bear to think of living without, you might prefer the latter. Now that's staying in love. That's a prolongation of the being in love, which involves alterations that happen in human being, given our nature, given our physiology, over the course of many years. Can you have all at once? Maybe. Can you have all three? I think that does happen, that some people fall in love and then they are in love and they stay together. That would be a happy, really happy marriage. There are lots of divorces, but there are surely people who succeed in their marriages in the sense of having all three of these, maybe at different phases. And then the question is, could they have them all at the same time in middle age, let's say? I don't know. I mean, it's so remote from my own experience, I don't know what to say, and nobody has done much with these concepts of mine. There haven't been people attacking and defending me. Maybe it was just a bright idea of mine that wasn't any good. But maybe, I don't know what to say. I mean, you've got to work that out for yourself.
What do you think? A lot of people when they have their first sexual experience, kind of end up falling in love with that person.
Yeah, because the first experience can be so powerful. Well, particularly since the time when you usually have your first experience is not when you're a middle-aged man or woman, but rather when you're at a point where your hormones are at their peak. In the case of men, the testosterone, which is the crucial male hormone, is at a peak at the age of about 16. And then it declines a little and sort of levels off at around 20, 23. And then it continues on a plateau, but then it sort of goes down, right? So if you have your first experience when you're a teenager, which is probably not uncommon in America at least, it could be tremendous, unless you're so blasé because of what everybody has said.
I actually brought in an example of, like, I guess, an issue of science which kind of backs up this idea of that it is innate within us to want to be with another person based on, I guess, our hormones and our bodily, the way we've been made as humans, actually promotes the wanting to be with just one other person.
At least one.
Well,
one at a time, maybe. I mean, no. I think the reason I'm saying that is because in love or sex, it may be that you really want to be with one person, but you wouldn't want to be in a society where there's nobody else. You'd finally get bored with each other.
Well, I think it more has to do with the idea that you would like to be able to be with one person and be able to have a role as taking care of the family and doing those types of things, that's actually, the falling in love is actually a part of who we are as humans.
I read something different about that. I read that, I forget where it was, but it was kind of trying to characterize in like a biological way why men are so promiscuous and women aren't. And it was kind of like, the whole like animalistic thing where the women would be raising the children at home so they'd be more inclined to just stick with one person, whereas the man was trying to spread his seed so he'd want many different
The invention of the pill altered that a great deal, because before the pill, there were hardly any contraceptions that really worked. Casanova, the famous writer who had lots of love affairs, so his name has become synonymous with a Don Juan kind of character, right? A Casanova. He wrote memoirs, and in one volume of these memoirs, this is the end of the 18th century, he talks about this terrific technological discovery, technological invention. I think he calls it the Dutch slip. Well, it's a condom. The point is, until then, people didn't have condoms. After then, the condoms weren't well enough constructed, so they weren't very reliable. And the men often wouldn't use them because of sensuous reasons. They wanted to feel the body of the woman instead of putting on a glove, so to speak. So that the woman was at the mercy of her physiology. That if she had sex, she would probably have a baby sooner or later. What was used to be called in a generation before mine, the inevitable happens. The inevitable will happen. And so she'd pay the price. And if the man didn't marry her and to think of her as a legitimate spouse, she would be ostracized. She would have to either kill the baby and the abortion was very, very dangerous until recently, or she would have to support it on her own in a miserable condition. So for that reason, the male attitude would be very different to from the woman's. But the pill changes all that, because with the pill, there's greater security, even more than a diaphragm had been, and women might expect to be able to emulate the male desire for trial experimentation with a sex partner without becoming prostitutes who are a different order have a different kind of problem entirely. So that generalization about the biology of male and females may to some extent be a function of the society, whether or not it's before the pill or after the pill, and what the attitude toward technological devices like that is in different societies. Men are rendered very aggressive by the testosterone that also makes them sexual. That's a biological fact about men, that the testosterone makes them both libidinally eager and very aggressive. Women, depending more on estrogen and progestin, are not like that. And so that would be one reason, another additional reason, why the men would be eager for sex and the woman would be more reluctant, coy, and not ready simply to be available, and worried about the future, because they would be the ones who would have the babies. And they're more nurturant because they're less aggressive, and therefore they're more suitable for bringing up babies. But men can learn how to do that too. It's just that in the state of nature, that's how the biology would seem to fall out. You want to go on?
Yes. I wanted to talk about...
And that's the sensuous and the passionate and staying in love, being in love, and falling in love. So are we going beyond that now?
Yeah, I wanted to talk about the first myth we haven't gotten today.
Go ahead.
On page 20, I don't know if everybody has the same book, but you bring up a point about, I'm not sure how to say this person's name, La Rochefoucauld.
Denis, La Rochefoucauld?
Yes.
Oh, I thought there's Denis de Rougemont, who wrote a book called Love in the Western World. No, this is the Duc de La Rochefoucauld, who wrote in the 17th century about life and sex and love, and was very witty. And one of the things I quote there.
Yes, what he says is that some people would never have fallen in love if they had not heard about it.
Yeah.
And you say that, in a sense, you think this is true of everyone.
Yeah,
and
love is a concept that we construct and then try to fix it to experience. And if you didn't have the concept, that might be, you might never have that kind of experience.
I feel like that it also plays in a different way, and because of, you do talk about how we are systematically mislabeled by the fables that present love as magic, and I think almost by being fed all of this magic and all of this, oh, love is such a grand explosion that you're going to feel all these amazing things and you're just going to automatically be, attracted to this person and all of this stuff, that actually could prevent some people from falling in love, because everyone's always waiting for this stuff to happen that never actually does. And so, in a way, maybe we don't experience love because of that as well.
The point in the history of ideas, and for this you really would have to slog your way through the 1,400 pages. There is a literary, poetic, also novelistic in novels tradition in which they talk about falling in love, falling in love, falling in love, and people sometimes say, I'm thinking now of a 12th century sort of novel in verse called Aeneas. It's a story of Dido and Aeneas. And the young girl is saying, what is this thing called love? Everybody talks about it, and I've never experienced anything like that. And it's true, in the puerile stage, young kids, for instance, call it, mush. They have no tolerance for the idea of people falling in love, right? Because they haven't experienced it. Their hormones haven't brought them to that stage of development. But the girl says that, and the mother says, well, you won't know what it is until it hits you. When it hits you, you will be surprised. And then she describes all of the changes that take place when you do fall in love. Now, first of all, notice that this already presupposes a biological firmament foundation for it, but it becomes the basis of literature, and people in an intermediary stage, young girls, for instance, who may be slow to develop, or young boys like me, who I was very slow to develop sexually. You read about this and you think, what is it this I'm missing? I wonder,
But I feel like
what it is. Why am I somehow retard or spastic or something wrong with me? And they talk about love so much. What is it? And then finally, you carry out the myth in yourself.
But I feel like that idea of love is such a cultural thing and kind of just a result of our society, that idea that love is this general thing. But I think if that didn't exist, we would still all feel some sense of love. We all have some sort of innateness to love and to be loved, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we would feel it in the way that society says, oh, well, you hold hands with the person and
Okay.
those things are a result of what we know that love is supposed to be.
Do you know who Dorothy Parker was? She wrote in the 1920s and 30s and was one of the wittiest people who ever lived. She had her own column in the New Yorker and all sorts of places. She was a very, very witty writer and daring. This is one example that comes to mind. You can take a horticulture, but you can't make her drink. You can take a horse to culture, but you can't. Or you can take a horse to water, but you can't make it drink. This way of fooling you because you think she's talking about horticulture, but she's talking about a word that was a little taboo then, right? That's typical. There's a poem of hers. Many, I wish I could think of some other of her witty things, wittier even than that. That I wish I could remember, but it's about love is a thing that is always wonderful. Love is a beautiful experience. I'm just inventing the lines. She writes it as a short poem. Love is a constant joy. And finally, love is a joyous form of mania. And I am Marie of Romania. Marie, do you ever heard? Maria of Romania was the Queen of Romania at that time, right? In other words, only a crazy person would talk this way about love, right? The idea that everyone experiences it is what she's ridiculing. And I think it probably is not true that just without having read anything or heard anything about it, that everyone is going to have this loving experience of love. Or falling in love. I think there must be millions of peasants in the world, illiterate people who never fell in love with anybody. They married, they had families, they had sex, but they wouldn't have fallen in love.
I think that's my point exactly, is that they don't fall in love in the sense of love as we know it. Just because that doesn't mean that the love of, oh, I love you so much because, you know, you do all sorts of great things to me. That doesn't mean that that's the only thing that love is.
Right, so falling in love is not universal, right?
No, why not?
But there may be other kinds. I don't know that do you think everyone finds love? Lots of people don't. You might say that's sad. I see people in the street all the time and think this one or that one looks as if there's never been a moment of love in his or her life. We may all be capable of it, but it doesn't mean that in every society everyone is going to realize that.
Life has no meaning without love would be a very sad thing to say, because...
But there are many sad people in the world.
Exactly, because you can exist without loving. You can still have your life and many things that you do that are important and could affect others, but that doesn't mean you have to love.
But psychiatrists regularly get patients who have been so abused and maltreated when they were young, and maybe afterwards, or different patients who were abused and maltreated by their society, by the world, and maybe people who have been abused and maltreated by both and who don't have any fire of inspiration, who are just ordinary people without terribly exceptional cortical ability, who have never experienced love.
I don't agree with your example there, though, because you can always find, like, I don't agree with your example there, because you can always find some, like, abnormal psychology person that, you know, doesn't experience something because of their past. But I mean, I think people on a whole are. I don't think you need to introduce the concept of love in order for.
So when you say abnormal psychology, you mean it's a tiny minority?
You're making such an exception.
What?
Yeah, like,
I think he's trying to say that you're just making such an exception right now.
It's not true of almost everybody.
Yes. I think.
Well, I don't know. I mean, that would take some research, which you can do.
Because I think what I'm trying to say overall is that most people are capable of feeling love in some sort of sense, regardless if they had known about it or if they had, you know, been shown that.
They don't. Nobody wants the capacity. You want the realization.
But even if maybe your circumstances don't allow you to be in the position to where you can fall in love, or where you love a thing or love, and you know, anything. But I think that as humans, that is one of the things that distinguishes us.
Oh, I'm not denying that it exists among human beings, and
we have the capability of loving.
Oh, I believe, no, but who can deny that? It seems to me to be a truism.
But it seems to me that just because, you know, that...
And if you include one kind or another, yes, this is a common phenomenon. And it'll be different with us from what it is with animals. Animals, I'm sure, love as much as we do, but they do it in such a different way that we don't recognize it. There is that term that I mentioned last time, instead of sympathy. I picked it up in an article by somebody, and I liked it, and so I developed it. It made a big thing out of it in one of my books. Instead of a mother cat doesn't feel sympathy for her kitten, but doesn't mean that she doesn't love it. She shows her feeling through bodily contact. Sympathy means having feelings. You know, oh, poor thing, or you got a boo-boo, or the mother shows love to the human child through language and through concepts and through these very complicated system of feelings like what we call sympathy, which are also in need of analysis, and which I give analysis to in my most recent books. So I don't think, or maybe I get into sympathy here, I'm not sure. In any event, it continued over a period of many years with me. That's something human. Cats don't go around moaning, and they don't have language, they don't have concepts, but they make contact and show their love for their baby by making it accessible to them, looking at them, touching them, feeling them. The word, let's see, instead of sympathy, this person whose term I picked up was sympathy. I'll try to remember, look it up for you next time. It's a bodily equivalent, making contact through the body rather than through words or feelings. So it's not just human beings who love, but other animals do in different ways that we hardly understand, and we do it in a great panoramic way. Remember, I'm a pluralist, so there isn't any one definition for the word love. I never give a definition for love. It isn't just one thing. It's a gamut that's very important in life as we know it. And so my job as a humanist, pluralist, non-reductive philosopher is to see the different aspects, the different ways in which something could be called a phenomenon of love, and then to make sense out of that. I'll give you an example. People, in fact, this was, it came out in that symposium. There was a very nice Jesuit priest who wrote a paper about me. No, there were nice Jesuit priests, but I think this one was not a Jesuit, actually. I forget what his order was. Maybe he was a Paulist. In any event, he criticized me because he said, I talk very fervently and with great appreciation of what I call the love of things. That will come into your reading if it hasn't already. And he said, that isn't love. Only God can be loved, and we love God because God is a person, and we love other persons because they are created in the image of God. So the only true love has to be a love of persons. You can't have a love of things. And we argued, and it comes out in what you'll be reading based on my commentary, my reply to my friendly commentators, and my reply to my critics and friendly commentators. Remember, I told you that'll come up in the reading later on. So I defend my idea of the love of things. But to me, that is an authentic love and has to be cultivated. If you're a carpenter, you love those tools. You depend on them. You get to understand them. There's a kind of love I have for my computer. Like all love, it's based on my self-interest because I'm dependent on it, I need it, but also it's become a kind of collaborator of mine. It gives me ideas, sitting in the way my teaching with you, which one reason I love teaching at MIT, because I can have students like you, is that it elicits ideas from me. It gives me a sense of life, and I then am able to sometimes be creative that way. Well, the computer is like that. You're not things only, you're also persons. The computer is just a thing. I'm not going to say the computer is a person. But when I think about human beings, they are both persons and things. And that was the basis of my reply to the priest, very lovable man. I liked him very much. My reply was, if you're a human being, you are a person, but there are no persons who are human beings who aren't also things. That's what is so special about us. We are both things and persons. Our thinginess comes to us through our body. And if you don't love your body, you can't love yourself. And if you don't love yourself, you can't love in the way that a person loves. So that for us, there is an inseparable love of body and love of things and love of persons, and that's definitive of human nature. And I don't know, with other species, one might have to say something different. But for me, the love of persons is crucial, but that can't be separated from the love of bodies. And that's why, that's another thing that comes into the analysis at some point, caring. Love is caring, caring for, and caring about and caring for. Do you know the movie The Elephant Man, or play? It was a terribly disfigured person that Anthony Hopkins, as a doctor in 19th century England, tries to help, but he's so hideous that he would never appear in public or covered. And at the same time, he had a very sensitive, refined soul. So it was a terrible tragedy that his appearance was so grotesque. In a sense, it's a variation on Beauty and the Beast. He was both simultaneously. He had a beautiful soul and a beastly, grotesque appearance because of some anatomical abnormality. In one place, in one part of the movie at least, he is befriended by a couple of actresses, and who are very much struck by his sensitivity, and they are Shakespearean actors, so he reads Shakespeare, and he discusses it with them, and at one point he discusses Romeo and Juliet, and he says to them in his halting way, because of his defigured face, you know, Romeo didn't really love Juliet. And they said, oh no, he was tremendously in love with her. Why do you say that? And that's the whole point of the play. And he says, well, I know he cared for her, but he didn't take care of her. He didn't care about her. And the actresses are stunned by the wisdom of that comment, and it's a very profound distinction. If you love somebody, it isn't merely this personal relation, but you take care of that person, which means the body. You worry about her condition. You worry about her needs, about her bodily as a body, not just as a sex object or the body that's beautiful so that you love her as a beautiful person. You love her as a thing, the way the carpenter loves his tools and the way that one can love one's computer, because they're such wonderful, they're things that live in their own domain and have to be taken care of as such. You can't love your tools if you just throw them around and let them get out in the rain and rusty. You show your love for your tools by taking care of them and caring about them. And you love your body not by eating what comes to mind, but taking care of your body, right? And that's love. That kind of love is, for me, very important in understanding love in general. And that was my argument against the priest, that somehow you believe in a spiritual love, which is pure spirit, and I don't think of spirit that way. I think of spirit as incorporating all human values, including the ones that involve the love of the body. It's not a decarnalized one, the way God is pure spirit, and you experience love only if you have love of God as a pure spirit. Otherwise, it's pagan idolatry if you make a graven image and fall in love with that. Well, if you think of God as that graven image, that I think is not very commendable. But if the reason for not loving graven images, idols, is because they are things, but God is pure spirit, then we part company. I don't know, I've never experienced pure spirit. I don't know what it would be like to have pure spirit. I know what it's like to be spiritual because people in their body are able to transcend their bodies and even sacrifice themselves out of love for another person, which means that person as a body. who wants to live, that's a spiritual wonderment and a value I can understand. But pure spirit I can't understand because it makes the separation between the love of persons and the love of things. And I want to analyze those. And so a good deal of my life goes into that kind of approach rather than any cut and dry definition of what love is. Is this relevant, isn't it, or have I been carried away?
I think slightly carried away. But
Okay. Well, then you can always stop me.
okay. No, it's okay. Yeah. We still-
Have we had enough for today? It's after 5. Why don't we stop?